This video was filmed on Gubbi Gubbi country, and we pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, as well as any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be watching this recording. Hello and thank you for your interest in Gympie Regional Council's Digital Grant Skills Initiative. My name is Olivia Everett and I'm an independent grant writer and project coordinator based right here in the beautiful Gympie region. I've worked with many artists and arts organisations, sports and community clubs and not-for-profits to attract millions of dollars in grant funding. This video series intends to provide you with general advice, tips and tricks for approaching your next grant application and for successful applicants managing your grant-funded project well. There are 5 videos in this series covering project planning, grant writing, budgeting, marketing and grant management. You can re-watch these videos at any stage on Gympie Regional Council's website. If you have any questions or need support during the application process, Council is here to help you. If you're applying for a Gympie Regional Council grant, contact one of Council's local community development support officers or the RADF liaison officer for assistance on 1300 307 800 and remember to refer to Gympie Regional Council's website for the most up-to-date information. In this video, we'll focus on how to manage your grant if your application is successful. If this is you, congratulations on securing funding for your project. Topics covered in this video will include your funding agreement and receiving grant income, acknowledging funding bodies, delivering your project, including record keeping and spending your grant money, variations, which are changes to your project, and acquittal reports. Whether you're receiving grant funding for the first time or you need to refresh your memory, this resource is a one-stop shop about successfully managing your grant funding from Gympie Regional Council. Although all grant processes are different, much of this information about record keeping and reporting is applicable to other grant funding you may receive. Let's get underway. In the other videos in this series, we've covered planning your project, general tips for writing your grant application, support material you may need to submit with your application, and writing your grant budget. After you hit the submit button on your completed application form, your grant will be checked for its eligibility and assessed. Your application for funding will either be successful or unsuccessful. The funding body, such as Gympie Regional Council, will notify you of the outcome to the email address you used for your Smarty Grants account. If your application is unsuccessful, don't feel discouraged. Remember, grant funding is highly competitive. Most funding bodies receive far more good quality applications than they have funding for. It's time to bounce back, review your project, and ask for feedback on your application if it's available. There may be an opportunity for you to rework or strengthen aspects of your application and resubmit to a future round or seek alternative funding. If your grant application is successful, this is just the beginning. You now need to deliver the project you wrote about in your application, spend the grant money like you've listed in your budget, and report back to your funding body about what you've done and achieved with the money. This is called an acquittal or outcomes report. When you receive that notification that your grant has been successful, make sure you read all the information provided to you. In some cases, the outcome of the grant is confidential for a short period of time. Your funding body may advise you that the good news is under embargo until they tell you otherwise. If the news of your successful grant is embargoed, this means you should treat the news confidentially, so don't announce it on social media. If you're awarded a grant by Gympie Regional Council, you will need to complete your funding agreement and submit an invoice for the exact dollar value of the grant you've received. You will receive the instructions by email and you will complete this in Smarty Grants, just like your initial grant application. In this example, you can see that the funding agreement and invoice submission is available in Smarty Grants underneath my submitted grant application. The status of this will be in progress until you've completed the task. Once you've completed this form and uploaded the required documents, you can submit this, and the status will change to submitted with a green tick, as you can see on the right-hand side. When you complete your funding agreement, check the information provided in case you need to meet any special conditions, and for RADF recipients, upload a signed copy of your letter of offer. So, what are special conditions? The grant assessors may have awarded grant funding to your project, subject to meeting special conditions before you receive the funding. Examples of special conditions may be a more detailed budget, additional letters of support, or other clarification. If special conditions apply to you, these will be listed in the funding agreement form, and it will provide instructions if additional uploads are required. You will also need to upload an invoice for the grant amount. Your invoice must include the date of issue, an invoice number, grant application number as a reference, your ABN, your bank details, and the grant amount. You will find an invoice template on Gympie Regional Council's website. Make sure you follow the instructions in Smarty Grants about GST if this is applicable to you or your organisation. After you submit your funding agreement, invoice, and other required uploads, it's standard procedure at Gympie Regional Council that you will be onboarded by EFTSure. This process ensures the required checks and balances are carried out before paying your invoice. EFTSure is an Australian-owned creditor and supplier onboarding, management, and verification software. It verifies creditor details and ensures payments are made securely and quickly. Council uses EFTSure to onboard all new suppliers or grant recipients, including those who have not received payment in the last 2 years. So what can you expect from the onboarding process? The process begins with your grant officer filling in a form on your behalf over the phone. You will then receive an email from verifications@gympie.qld.gov.au. This email will direct you to an online form. After completing this form, you'll receive a verification phone call from an EFTSure team member to confirm the details that you have provided. This phone call will come from a Sydney number, in other words, a phone number with the 02 phone code at the beginning. This phone call from EFTSure is legitimate and part of Council's standard process. You'll need to confirm the following details, which should match those listed in your funding agreement and invoice. BSB number, bank account number, bank account name, ABN number and trading name, and the name of the representative confirming the detail. That's you. Once this phone call is complete and your details are verified, Council will process your invoice and grant funds will be paid to your nominated bank account. If you do not complete this verification process with EFTSure, Council can't pay you. It is a condition of most grant funding that you will need to acknowledge the funding body publicly. This may be in event marketing, posters, announcements, social media, or any signage throughout your project. Details of the required funding acknowledgements that you need to use will be in your funding agreement. These requirements differ from grant to grant, so make sure you read them carefully. For RADF, all acknowledgements on marketing materials must use this text. The Regional Arts Development Fund is a partnership between the Queensland Government and Gympie Regional Council to support local arts and culture in regional Queensland. You will also need to use the provided logo lockup. A logo lockup is a specific arrangement of the required logos or statements provided by the funding body. For RADF, this will include Gympie Regional Council's logo. Please note that all uses of the council logo need to be approved before you can publicly distribute your marketing materials. You need to allow up to 10 business days for approval, so don't leave this request until the last minute. You cannot change the provided logos or acknowledgement text in any way. Alternatively, if you are funded through Council's Community Grants Program, you will need to use the following acknowledgement. This project received funding assistance from Gympie Regional Council's Community Grants Program 2024-2025 or the year relevant to your project. You will also need to place Council's logo on all promotional materials, equipment or infrastructure as relevant to the project. Again, use of the logo needs to be approved, and this may take Council up to 10 business days. Here are some examples of how previous recipients have acknowledged Council's support. Make sure you check the grant guidelines and Council's website for the most up-to-date information about acknowledging funding. You will need to keep records of your acknowledgements. This could include screenshots of Facebook posts, posters, or recordings of announcements. Keep these records so that you can use them in your acquittal report, which we'll talk about shortly. Once you've completed the funding agreement, met any special conditions, and received the grant money, you can now move on to delivering your project. This is the exciting part. Your hard work on project planning and grant writing has paid off. Ensure you revisit your budget, timeline, and proposed aims and outcomes throughout your project. You will be required to report against these things at the end of your project. The reason why this is important is because at the end of the grant-funded project, you will be required to submit an acquittal report. This is also sometimes called an outcomes report. The grant acquittal is a process of reporting on your project activities, outcomes, and expenditure back to the funding body. A blank copy of this report will be available to you in Smarty Grants. You can see it listed here underneath the initial grant application and funding agreement. Again, the status of this will be in progress until you have completed all the requirements of the form and hit submit. Have a look at this report before you make a start on your project. This will help you to understand what you will need to report on. You need to think about your acquittal and what you're required to report on right from the start. A few tips about best practice record keeping. Use a spreadsheet to track your grant expenditure. Start keeping records as soon as you've received the payment of the grant. Track your spending and keep copies of all receipts and invoices. Take many high quality photos throughout your project. This is particularly important for events. Once the event is over, you have missed your chance. If you are delivering a facilities or infrastructure project, make sure you take before and after photos to demonstrate how the grant money has been spent. Save copies of marketing materials or social media posts where you have acknowledged your grant funding or use the funding body's logo. And for events and activities, ensure you track attendance and participation and gather attendee feedback where you can. This will not only help with your acquittal, but it will also help you to understand if you achieved what you set out to do and hone your project planning and delivery skills in future. Ensure you practice good record keeping so that you can demonstrate all of this back to the funding body. It's better to have too much information than not enough. In the nature of delivering projects, it's not uncommon for minor or sometimes significant changes to occur. If something changes, you should let Gympie Regional Council know as soon as possible. For some project changes, you may be required to complete a formal variation form. At Gympie Regional Council, if this is the case, the form will be made available to you in Smarty Grants after you have notified Council and made this request. You need to have this initial conversation in writing first. Examples of project changes could be moving event dates or changing venues. Whether it's a small or a big change, it's best to contact the funding body to let them know. At Gympie Regional Council, a variation to your project must be approved in advance. Make sure you allow sufficient time to notify Council, complete the variation form if applicable to you, and have this approved. Don't wait until after the change has happened to let Council know. As previously defined, your grant acquittal or outcomes report is an opportunity to report back to the funding body and confirm you have expended the grant funding as agreed. Your acquittal or outcomes report for Gympie Regional Council funding is due 4 weeks after your project completion date. You will report against your original grant application or any approved variation you have submitted. If something is preventing you from submitting your grant acquittal by the due date, make sure you let Council know and request an extension. Any extensions to your acquittal due date will need to be approved in advance. Don't wait until after the deadline to request this. Here's an excerpt from my grant acquittal for the RADF project we looked at earlier, and that has been used as an example throughout the other videos in this series. In the Gympie Regional Council acquittal report in Smarty Grants, you are required to share your outcomes and your learnings from the project, share if anything has changed since you submitted your grant application, provide data about participation if you've delivered any events and activities, and provide evidence of all project costs, not just the grant money. This means uploading tax invoices and receipts, confirming payment to support your claims. Don't upload quotes, you must upload invoices and receipts. Remember, you can't spend grant money on anything before your project started or after it's finished. Otherwise, council may determine that this money has been used retrospectively or as a reimbursement, and this is not eligible expenditure. Make sure you name your files so that they easily correspond with the approved budget. For example, if you included $200 for venue hire in your budget, make sure you title your invoice something along the lines of Venue Hire, Gameri Hall, Invoice 234. Invoices should also include the following information: date of issue, an invoice number, ABN of the business or supplier, payment details, and itemised expenditure. It's a requirement to provide a tax invoice or receipt for any item over $1,000, but it's best practice to keep this evidence for all expenditure. You also need to share a minimum of 3 photos of your project. Please ensure file names contain information such as the name of the project or event and the date. For RADF grants, you may also need to credit the name of the photographer and the title of the artwork, exhibition, or performance if relevant. Provide examples of how you acknowledged your funding. If you only made a verbal acknowledgement, for example, at an event, please ensure this is recorded so you can upload this as evidence. Acquittals may be audited by independent bodies to ensure good governance and accountability, so it is important that your acquittal is accurate. Acquittals are an important part of the grants process. When you enter a funding agreement with council or another funding body, you're contractually obliged to deliver your project in line with this agreement, including the timeframes and budget. Failing to submit a grant acquittal or supplying incomplete or insufficient information may affect your ability to attract future funding. In this video on grants management, we've discussed a range of topics relating to managing your grant at Gympie Regional Council. Here's a reminder of some of the key tips from this video. We looked at how to complete your funding agreement and invoicing council for the grant money. Don't start spending the money the second you receive your letter of offer. You need to complete a few more steps first. We also discussed how to acknowledge the grant funding. You will need council to approve the use of these logos before you can distribute marketing materials publicly. Keep copies so that you can demonstrate how the funding was acknowledged in your acquittal report. Make sure you look at the acquittal form in Smarty Grants before you start your project. We also discussed the importance of good record keeping, including tracking your budget. You should keep copies of all receipts and tax invoices that relate to project expenditure. It's important to communicate with council if you have any questions or concerns. This includes any changes to your project, as these may need to be approved. And lastly, we discussed what's required in your acquittal report. This is the critical last step to finalising your grant. You need to submit this on time. Acquittals are a really straightforward process if you've kept good records throughout your project. If you found this video useful, I'd encourage you to share this resource with a friend, committee member, or another local community group or club. There are 4 more videos in this series of resources to support you during your next grant application. You can find these on Gympie Regional Council's website. We hope that these videos are useful to you wherever you are. However, please note that information in this video reflects the Gympie Regional Council 2024 to 2025 guidelines. Please ensure you check the relevant website and the current guidelines before submitting your application. Thank you for joining us.